My dad told me I was banned from the wedding before I even had the chance to say, "Hello." His voice came through the phone sharp and steady, the way people sound when they have already practiced the speech in their heads. "Maggie, you can't come. Olivia's pastor said your energy would bring bad luck. You're unmarried at 37. It affects the aura of the ceremony." That was the opening line. No hesitation, no cushioning, just the verdict. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped because I didn't hear anything inside. My own body. No heartbeat, no breath, nothing. Just the quiet shock of someone who has finally run out of ways to pretend her. Family sees her as anything other than a superstition to be managed. I remember staring at the microwave clock blinking 5:42 in the evening, in my apartment in Dilworth, as if the time would somehow help this make sense. It did not. I asked him the only question that felt logical at that point. "So I'm not allowed to come to my own sister's wedding, but I still have to pay for it." There was a long exhale on the other end, the kind my dad uses when he is about to explain why something unfair is actually my fault. "Maggie, family contributes. Everyone knows that. And your sister's happiness should matter to you. Not showing up is one thing. Not helping financially is another." The number he said next might as well have been a punch to the chest, though my hand stayed perfectly still. $485,000, said like it was a tip left on a restaurant table. I almost laughed, not from humor, more from the absurdity. A part of me wondered if this conversation was happening to someone else and I was just listening in. But it was my dad's voice, using that gentle, scolding tone he saves for moments when he needs me to comply, without questioning. He went on about tradition, about generosity, about how the community was watching. I felt something quiet click inside me, a switch I didn't even know existed. "So if I don't send the money, what does that mean?" His answer came quickly. "It means you don't want your sister to have a blessed marriage. It means you don't care about your family." My dad kept talking, but I stopped absorbing the words. Something about Pastor Tim, something about spiritual harmony, something about people asking questions if I showed up unmarried. It all blurred together like voices heard underwater. My mind moved to quieter places that made more sense. The calendar on the wall with Olivia's wedding week circled in green, the reminder I had set months ago. The hotel reservation I had offered to cover, back when I still believed kindness, might change this family's patterns. When my dad finally stopped talking, I realized I had not given him anything he asked for. No promise, no reassurance, not even anger. Just silence. He filled that silence the same way he always has. "Maggie, do the right thing. Don't embarrass us. Send the money by next week, and don't come. It will ruin the energy." Then he hung up. Not a goodbye. Not even a sigh. Just a click that sounded far too final. I stood there like an idiot, still holding the phone, staring at the faint reflection of my own face on the black screen. If someone had asked me what I felt at that moment, I would not have known what to tell them. Anger would have made sense. Hurt would have been predictable. But what surprised me was the absence of shaking, the absence of tears. Just a stillness that felt like clarity. My laptop sat open on the dining table, its screensaver glowing softly in the early evening light. I walked toward it because movement felt easier than standing still. The first thing I did was open my digital calendar. That green circle around the wedding date looked childish now, almost naive. I clicked it once, hold my breath, and deleted the entire reminder. The screen blinked for half a second, then the week stood empty again, as if it had never meant anything. I opened my banking app next. The list of transfers I had made to my family over the years scrolled down the list. Screen like a ledger of quiet obligations I had never truly questioned. Payments labeled medical gap, one-time support, emergency loan, unexpected expense. None of them were questioned by me. None of them repaid by them. For a long moment, I just stared at the numbers. Not the money itself, but the pattern, the cycle, the expectation wrapped in gratitude that only lasted long enough for the next request. There was no point arguing with my dad. That was a game designed for me to lose. Every time I asked a question, he rewrote the rules. Every time I set a boundary, he reframed it as selfishness. Every time I gave something, he forgot who it came from. And now he had decided I was not fit to stand in a church at my sister's wedding. Not because of who I was, but because of what I lacked. A ring. a husband, a narrative that comforted their sense of normal. I closed the banking app. Then, without hesitation, I opened a new browser tab and typed in flights to Nassau, Bahamas. The results loaded instantly. My cursor hovered for only a second before selecting a 6-star resort I had once promised myself I would visit when life finally became uncomplicated. I had always imagined I would go there to celebrate something, a promotion, a milestone, a new beginning. I never thought I would book it because I had been pushed out of my own family's celebration. The booking page asked for dates. I chose the exact week of the wedding. Check in on Friday morning. Check out 8 days later. A quiet, deliberate opposite of everything my dad had demanded. I entered my card information with a calm I did not fully understand. When I pressed confirm, a small box popped up on the screen telling me my reservation was complete. I stared at that confirmation for a long time, letting the weight of what it meant settle into place. My phone buzzed beside me. A new email. From my mom. The subject line read simply, "Let's keep peace." I opened it because some part of me still hoped she might surprise me after all these years. She did not. The message was filled with soft edges and spiritual concern. She wrote about community expectations, about how about how Olivia was sensitive to energy before big moments. There was a line about me being strong enough to let this one thing go for the sake of harmony. Another about how paying supported the blessing of the union. And buried toward the end, the sentence that stung in a quiet, familiar way. "You know we love you, but you sometimes make things harder than they need to be." I felt the stillness settle deeper. Mom's words were always framed in affection, but the message was the same as Dad's. Comply or be the problem. Give or be ungrateful. Aid in the burden or be the disappointment. They had just chosen different delivery methods. I closed the email without replying. There was nothing to say that would be heard the way I meant it. Nothing I could explain that would not be twisted into selfishness or drama. I learned long ago that my silence was often safer than my voice. Outside, through the blinds, I could see the porch light flick on automatically as the sun dipped behind the row of brick townhouses across the street. It was the kind of neighborhood where people walked their dogs after dinner and waved at each other without getting too close. A quiet place. A place where nothing dramatic ever happened. Unless you counted my dad's phone call, moments earlier, which I supposed qualified if you looked at it from a certain angle. I leaned back in my chair and tried to picture the wedding. Olivia in her lace gown. Mom fussing with the veil. My dad told jokes to guests he wanted to impress. And me, somewhere far away, sitting under palm trees with a book I probably wouldn't read because my mind would, still be orbiting around the same family gravitational pull it always had. Except this time, I would not be standing in the corner waiting to fix whatever went wrong. Booking that trip did not feel like revenge. Not yet. It felt more like relief. A small, sharp act of reclaiming something I had given away too easily for too long. Space. Choice. Time where my presence or absence did not have to be weighed against someone else's. Happiness. The apartment was quiet again. My phone lay face down on the table. I knew my dad would expect a transfer by next week, and my mom would expect a softened response by morning. But tonight, I let the silence stay. I let myself breathe. I let the decision settle across my shoulders like a coat that finally fit. I opened the transfer screen out of habit, my fingers moving the way they had every time my family called something an emergency. But this time, the number I typed was different. $100. Nothing more. A symbolic payment for a symbolic role I no longer intended to play. I pressed send and watched the confirmation blink across the screen. It was the softest possible goodbye. Then I booked my trip to the Bahamas. The flight confirmation sat open on my screen, the final detail in a day that had started so ordinarily and ended with a clean, undeniable shift. I closed my laptop slowly, listening to the soft click as it shut. There would be more fallout. There always was. But for the first time in a long time, I found myself curious instead of afraid. Curious about what would happen when I stepped out of the role they had written for me. Curious about how they would manage without the fixer. Curious about who I might be if I stopped bending myself into whatever shape kept the peace. That was the last thought I remember before turning off the kitchen light and standing in the quiet doorway of my apartment, feeling something new, something almost steady settle inside me. Not freedom, not yet, but the beginning of it, the beginning of freedom. That was all I felt as I turned off the kitchen light. The next clear moment I remember came 12 hours later when the jet wheels touched down in Nassau and the cabin lights brightened in that soft, forgiving glow airlines use to make you believe life is gentler than it is. I had slept for maybe an hour, but I felt strangely steady, almost clean, the way a room feels after someone has taken out the trash. Not lighter, just clearer. I carried that feeling with me as I walked through the jet bridge and stepped into warm Bahamian air that wrapped around my shoulders like a deliberate contrast to the cold silence I had left behind in Charlotte. By the time I reached the resort, the sun had risen fully, and everything shimmered with that humid brightness that made colors look too saturated to be real. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and something floral I could not name. Someone placed a cool towel in my hand. Someone else offered a glass of pineapple juice, and it struck me how long it had been since anyone handed me something without expecting anything in return. I checked in, accepted the room key, and followed a bellman past an open courtyard where the sound of water echoed gently against white tile. It felt almost ceremonial, stepping into a place where no one knew me, where no one needed me to fix anything. When the door closed behind me in the suite, I stood still for a moment, listening to nothing. No vibrating phone, no footsteps, no voices drifting through walls. Just the low hum of the ceiling fan and the distant pulse of waves against the rose shore. I set my luggage down and walked straight to the balcony. The ocean stretched out in that impossible shade of turquoise that feels like a reward you did not earn. I let myself breathe it in, slow and steady, as if the air itself were washing something off my skin. My phone buzzed inside the room, a faint vibration softened by the thick carpet. I did not check it. Not yet. I turned the device over, held down the button, and silenced every alert except emergency contacts. The screen went dark again. It was remarkable how quiet a life could become when you stopped leaving every door open for people to walk through. I sat on the balcony for a long time, long enough for the sun to shift and paint different patterns across the railing. My mind drifted in that loose, wandering way it does when there is no immediate fire to put out. That was when old words began resurfacing, the ones my mom used to say whenever life felt uncertain. Some women carry heavy fortunes. Some bring storms without meaning to. Your aura has always been strong, Maggie. Strong can be dangerous. I used to nod along as if those ideas made sense, as if energy and destiny and invisible forces were things I needed to account for when planning my life. It was only now, miles away, that I could hear how much weight those sentences had quietly placed on my shoulders. Another memory surfaced. A different afternoon, years earlier. Mom had set her hand on my cheek and said a woman without a husband should be careful about attending weddings. Too much vulnerable energy, too many spirits watching. At the time, I laughed because it seemed like one of her little superstitions, the kind she picked up from church friends or articles she half read. I did not realize then how deeply she believed it, how thoroughly my dad would adopt it, how easily they would use it as a reason to exclude me from a moment they claimed was sacred. The phone buzzed again inside. I let it. I had made a decision the moment I booked this trip. I was not running. I was retreating with intention. I would not explain myself. I would not apologize for not being where they wanted me. I would simply step back and observe, finally giving myself the distance I had needed for years. I walked back into the room and opened the curtains wider, letting the light stretch across the bed. My suitcase lay open on the bench, and I unpacked slowly. Not because I needed to, but because the small motions felt grounding. I folded clothes into drawers, lined my toiletries along the bathroom counter, tucked my sandals near the sliding door. There was something surprisingly soothing about making a temporary space feel like home, especially when my actual home had never felt entirely like one. When I finally reached for my phone, it was more out of curiosity than obligation. The screen lit up with missed calls stacked one after another, the most recent time-stamped 9:27 in the morning. 10 calls from Mom, 4 from Dad, 2 from an unknown number that I suspected belonged to one of Mom's church friends, acting as an emissary. I did not open any of them. I scrolled past until I reached the bottom of the list, where a single unread message sat waiting. It was from Olivia. 4 words. "Where are you, Maggie?" For a moment, I just stared at it, letting my mind run through all the possible tones she might have written it in. Anger, fear, confusion, desperation. With Olivia, it was always a blend of innocence and accusation, difficult to separate. She had a way of sounding like the victim, even when she was the one holding the match. I thumbed the screen but did not open the message fully. I already knew what it would turn into. A request, a justification, a reminder of family duty. Or worse, a plea wrapped in flattery. I set the phone face down on the desk and stepped back out to the balcony. The breeze had picked up slightly, carrying the scent of salt water and sunscreen from the beach below. I watched a couple walk hand in hand along the shoreline, their footprints fading behind them as the tide came in. There was something strangely comforting about that. Proof that everything softened with enough distance and time, even marks left with intention. I was not naive. I knew choosing silence would cause ripples. My family operated like a machine that required constant input from me to keep running smoothly. If I stopped feeding it, the gears would grind. They would blame me for the noise. They would accuse me of creating the friction when all I had ever done was reduce it. The phone buzzed again, a single vibration. Another message from Olivia appeared on the preview screen. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Urgent was a word my family used often, usually when they needed something last minute, or when someone made a mistake I was expected to clean up. I waited, expecting a follow-up message. More context. More drama. Nothing came. Just the one sentence sitting there like a small alarm. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I finally understood that my immediate responses had become a kind of currency they depended on. If I replied now, even out of kindness, it would signal that my boundary was negotiable. And I had finally, painfully, learned that boundaries only work when they are not bent for convenience. I stayed outside until the sun dipped lower. The light softened, turning the ocean's surface into something almost metallic. People gathered near the pool, laughing, clinking glasses, sinking into lounge chairs. The feeling that crept over me then was not loneliness. It was something closer to unfamiliar freedom, a space where I did not have to anticipate anyone's reactions or absorb anyone's disappointment. When the sky shifted into deeper blues and purples, I went back inside and showered. The water was warm and steady, a contrast to the too hot, too cold system in my apartment back home that had always needed fixing, but never seemed urgent enough to schedule. Afterward, I wrapped myself in the oversized resort robe and sat on the edge of the bed with one towel-dried leg tucked under me. My phone rested on the nightstand, quiet now, as if it had given up trying to summon me. I let my mind drift again, this time to something simpler. The notion of being unavailable. Truly unavailable. The idea felt almost illicit, like skipping school or calling in sick just to wander aimlessly. I realized then that I had not taken a real vacation in years. Every trip home had been a negotiation. Every holiday has been a performance. Every weeknight call had contained some hidden request or emotional balancing act. Out here, miles away from anyone who expected anything from me, the silence felt less like a void and more like a reprieve. Eventually, I walked back to the balcony for one last look at the ocean before bed. The water was darker now, but still restless, moving in soft, predictable rhythms. A thought settled over me slowly. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just true. For the first time in my life, I was somewhere that needed nothing from me. Somewhere I could let the world exist without my constant tending. Somewhere I could let everything at home unravel without stepping in to stop it. That realization sat with me as I turned back into the room and closed the day. Curtains for the night. A quiet acknowledgement that this was the beginning of something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Not rebellion. Not escape, just the simple act of not being the one who held everything together. I lay in the dark room for a long time after closing the curtains, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner as if it were the first steady thing I had heard in years. Sleep came in short waves, shallow and restless, but when morning light pressed lightly against my eyelids, I felt more awake than I expected. There was something about waking up far from home that loosened memories in my mind, the way warm water loosens old tape on a box. I had not planned on thinking about the past, but thoughts have a way of drifting where they want when the present finally stops, making demands. I made coffee in the small room machine, not because it tasted good, but because the familiar motion helped slow my breathing. As I stirred a packet of powdered creamer into the mug, a year drifted forward. 2013. I was 30 then, working my first real salary job in uptown Charlotte. I remember the exact moment my phone buzzed under my desk. It was a text from Mom, written in sentences that were too long, too vague, and too urgent. There had been a medical gap, she said. Insurance would not cover everything. My dad was sick but stable, but the bills were coming fast. She did not want to worry me, but she also did not know what to do. The way she framed it made it sound as though not helping would be cruel, while helping would be a noble act of daughterly devotion. I stepped into the hallway by the elevators and called her back. She sounded tired. Or maybe she wanted to sound tired. I remember pressing my thumb into the seam of my blazer pocket, feeling the fabric pull. I told her I would send what I could after work. She sighed a soft thank you, and I felt something inside me unclench, as if my responsibility had been activated by a switch. That night, I transferred $3,000. She responded with a message full of gratitude and heart emojis that I knew she are, copied from some inspirational thread. The next morning, she texted again to say my dad was feeling better and that the stress was lifting. By Friday, she stopped mentioning it altogether. No update. No receipt. Just silence where the crisis had been. Looking back, I should have asked questions. I should have asked for specifics. But I was 30, eager to prove I could be useful, eager to be the kind of daughter who made things easier. So I let the silence sit. Things were fine, I told myself. And fine was all I ever aimed for with them. 3 years later, in 2016, the next request appeared. I had forgotten about the first one by then, or maybe I had simply folded it into the long list of things daughters were supposed to do. I was living in a small apartment near Freedom Park at that time, renting a place with creaky floors and a balcony that overlooked a parking lot. I had just sat down with a bowl of leftover pasta when my phone rang. It was my dad this time. His voice was sharper, more matter-of-fact. He said the family needed a bridge loan. That was the phrase he used, as if we were discussing a business matter instead of a household issue. There was a gap in their mortgage payment after a refinance delay. They were waiting for his work bonus. It was temporary, a quick fix, just until things cleared up. I remember feeling a pinch between my temples. Not pain exactly, just pressure. My dad rarely asked me for anything directly. He preferred Mom to soften the ground first. But this time, he came straight to me, using that confident tone that suggested there was no world in which I would refuse. I asked how much they needed, already knowing the answer would be higher than what I felt comfortable giving. He said $4,000. He said it casually, as if it were the price of a weekend getaway or a new set of tires. I told him I would send it by the next morning. He thanked me, but only once and quickly, as if lingering on gratitude might make him seem dependent. The next day, I made the transfer. Mom sent a long message thanking me for holding the family together. My dad sent nothing. A week passed, then a month. Life carried on. No one mentioned the loan again. There was no repayment. No acknowledgement that it had ever been a loan. When I asked Mom once whether the refinance had gone through, she changed the subject to Olivia's social life. I learned then that certain questions invited discomfort, and discomfort was treated as disrespect. I sipped my resort coffee and let the memory drift out again. I did not feel anger toward that younger version of myself. She was doing what she believed a good daughter did. She was following a script she had inherited, without ever reading the fine print. I felt a kind of quiet compassion for her naivety, maybe even envy, for how quickly she had believed that generosity would secure her a place in the family that felt safe. 2019 arrived in my mind with a different texture. I was older then, 30 fix, more established in my career, still believing I was inching closer to the version of myself who could finally say no and mean it. But Olivia had plans that year. She decided she wanted to become a content creator, not in a small way, not as a hobby. She was convinced she was meant for a bigger audience, that people would love her authenticity, her humor, her beauty. She said it the way people describe fate, with conviction and spark. She came to me in the way she always did when she wanted something, bright-eyed, soft voices. She needed help launching her brand, a new camera, lighting equipment, software, maybe a small cushion to give her the space to focus on content full-time. She said she would pay me back. She said this dream mattered to her. She said it would change everything. I remember sitting across from her at a cafe on East Boulevard. The table was small, and her hands kept brushing mine as she spoke. It was a tactic she used often, physical closeness that blurred the lines between sincerity and manipulation. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to support her because she was my sister, and because that was what I had always done. So I transferred $3,500. She sent me a string of thank you messages, voice notes, heartfelt promises. 3 months later, she stopped mentioning the channel. 6 months later, the equipment she bought was listed for sale on a neighborhood app. A year later, she told me she never really enjoyed content creation. I nodded, because that was what I did. I nodded and said it was okay. I nodded and let the silence cover the fact that the loan was never repaid and never referenced again. Standing on the balcony now, watching the waves roll in predictable patterns, I could see the thread running through all those years. A request, a transfer, a burst of gratitude, then quiet. Every time, like clockwork. I never pushed. I never questioned, not because I was weak, but because I believed helping them would eventually earn me understanding, respect, maybe even love that did not hinge on usefulness. No one had ever asked me if I could afford it. No one had asked whether it added stress to my own life. No one had wondered if I was lonely, or tired, or worn thin by the constant expectation. Not once in all those years had anyone in my family looked at me and asked them, simplest question, Michael, are you doing okay? The realization arrived with a surprising gentleness, not sharp, not painful, just true. I had become the fixer long before I realized I was playing that role. It was never assigned to me. I simply stepped into the space where everyone else refused to stand. I filled gaps. I smoothed edges. I provided solutions. And over time, they forgot it was an effort. They forgot it had a cost. They forgot I was choosing to help, not obligated to. The sun climbed higher, scattering bright reflections across the water. I rested my hands on the balcony railing and let the weight of the past settle, exactly where it belonged. Not erased, not forgiven, just understood. For the first time in my life, I could see the pattern clearly, and clarity, I learned, is its own kind of freedom. The morning light in Nassau had that gentle, forgiving glow that made everything look softer than it felt. I woke slowly, the sound of waves drifting through the cracked balcony door, and for a few seconds, I forgot there was a world beyond this room that wanted something from me. I lay still, letting the sheets cool around my legs, letting my breath settle into an easy rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar. It took effort to remember that back home, things were probably already beginning to unravel. I made my way to the small kitchenette, brewed the thin resort coffee, and carried the mug out to the balcony. From up here, the ocean looked like it was stitched together with long ribbons of blue and green, moving at a pace that had nothing to do with human urgency. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth settle behind my ribs. A soft wind lifted my hair, and for a moment, I considered the possibility that peace might be something a person could relearn, the way one relearns handwriting after years of typing. My phone lay face down on the table beside me. I had promised myself I would not reach for it first thing in the morning. That promise felt almost rebellious, like skipping homeroom when I was a teenager. The silence around me was a kind of luxury I could not remember feeling before, and I tried to let it fill the space where obligation usually sat. Eventually, curiosity nudged at me, not enough to break the silence completely, just enough to turn the phone over and glance at the lock screen. More missed calls, a handful of voicemail notifications, a short string of texts from numbers I did not recognize, likely people connected to the wedding in some way. I did not open any of them. Instead, I placed the phone back down, screen facing upward this time, like a small declaration that I was not hiding from anything. I was simply choosing not to join in. I spent part of the morning walking along the shoreline. The sand felt warm under my feet, and the breeze carried the scent of sunscreen and salt. A few families were gathered near the water, children laughing in that wild, uninhibited way children do when they are not yet aware of how quickly joy can be interrupted. I watched them for a while, letting the rhythm of their voices replace the noise I had grown used to navigating back home. Somewhere around midday, as I floated on my back in the resort pool, my mind drifted to Charlotte and the wedding preparations that were most likely in full swing. I could almost picture the scene. The wedding planner pacing around the church, flipping through a binder with ribbons sticking out of the edges, caterers unloading trays, florists trying to rework arrangements that were not matching the inspiration, photos Olivia had printed. All of them expect smooth coordination, perfectly timed payments, and no disruptions. I knew exactly how much of the financial structure behind those preparations depended on the assumption that I would step in. It had been that way for years. I had become a kind of invisible foundation, holding up the parts of their world that were unstable. And now, by doing nothing at all, I had removed myself from that familiar place. It was remarkable how quickly the absence of one person could shift the entire balance. By early afternoon, I returned to my room, rinsed the salt water from my skin, and slipped into a soft cotton dress. I sat on the edge of the bed, reaching for the bottle of water the housekeeping staff had left on the nightstand. As I took a sip, my phone lit up with an incoming call. I recognized the name immediately. My relationship manager from the bank. For a split second, old reflexes surged. The instinct to answer immediately, to find a quiet place, to fix whatever problem had surfaced. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. I did answer the call, but with none of the urgency that used to guide my movements. He greeted me with professional politeness, then explained that a large scheduled payment connected to a family event had been flagged due to insufficient information on the receiving account. He asked if I had a moment to verify the nature of the transfer. His voice carried no emotion, but the implication was clear. Something in the wedding budget depended on money that was not behaving the way it was expected to. I told him calmly that I was aware of the transaction, but would not be authorizing any further details. He paused, as if giving me time to reconsider. When I did not speak, he said he understood and would note the file accordingly. The call ended without any tension, without any urgency from my side, and without me offering the usual explanation or reassurance I had always felt obligated to provide. As I set the phone down, a quiet realization washed through me. This was the first time I had allowed a problem to remain a problem without stepping in to fix it. The feeling was not triumphant, not vindictive, just steady. It felt like placing a heavy box down after carrying it farther than intended. I stepped back out onto the balcony and the sun hit my shoulders in a warm, even line. The palm trees swayed gently, their leaves rustling in a rhythm that matched the hum in my chest. I watched tourists drift between the pool and the bar, ordering drinks with fruit skewers and bright umbrellas. None of them seemed pressed for time. None of them seemed tethered to demands waiting miles away. Meanwhile, in Charlotte, I could imagine the murmurs beginning. A payment delay. A vendor calling the wedding planner. Someone told my mom that the energy around the preparations felt off. I knew exactly how she would respond. She would lean into her familiar script. Some spiritual turbulence, she would say. Some unsettled aura. Maybe someone's presence was interfering with the flow of blessings. She had always been quick to attribute logistical issues to mystical causes, as if the real explanation was too ordinary to carry the burden of disappointment. I stood against the balcony railing, letting the sun warm the tops of my arms. The air felt thick and sweet. It occurred to me that in all the years my family had called me unlucky, or heavy, aura, or energetically complicated, no one had ever stopped to consider whether their constant dependence had been the source of their discomfort. It has always been easier to blame something invisible than to acknowledge imbalance. The day stretched into late afternoon. I read a few chapters of a book I had brought with me, although my eyes drifted more than they focused. I napped for a short while, letting the soft sounds from the hallway lull me into a light sleep. When I woke, the sky outside was tinged with pink, the kind of color that only appears briefly before fading into dusk. I wandered down to the beach again, letting my feet sink into the cool sand. The tide had risen, brushing closer to the shore, leaving behind smooth patches that reflected the dying light. I walked slowly, savoring the rhythm of my own steps. No rush, no obligation, no expectation waiting to swallow me whole. As the sun dipped lower, I felt that same clarity from the night before settle deeper. I had not caused anything to fall apart. I had simply stepped out of the role everyone assumed I would fill. And without me standing there, propping up the structure, the system began revealing its cracks. I paused, letting the breeze sweep across my face, and looked out at the water. It moved in steady, truthful lines, unconcerned with disappointment or blame. At that moment, I understood that every unraveling begins long before anyone notices. Some threads only show themselves when the person who has always held them finally loosens her grip. And I let myself feel the quiet of that truth as the sky darkened over the Bahamas. The next morning arrived with the kind of soft, steady light that makes the world look briefly untouched. I woke without an alarm, the way people do when their minds have been stretched thin for too long, and finally surrender to stillness. The air drifting through the balcony door carried a hint of salt and something sweet, maybe from the flowers lining the walkways below. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget that the day held any significance beyond the quiet in front of me. I dressed slowly, choosing loose linen pants and a light blouse, and moved through the room with an ease I had not felt in years. My body felt heavier than usual, not with dread, but with a kind of settled fatigue, the kind that comes after deciding to stop performing. When I reached the resort cafe, most of the morning rush had passed, leaving a few couples lingering at tables with half-empty coffee cups. I chose a table on the patio overlooking the water and ordered breakfast. The coffee arrived first, strong and darker than what I had made in my room. I stirred in a packet of sugar, watching it dissolve, and reminded myself that somewhere in Ohio, people were already dressing, lining up, adjusting veils, whispering prayers, reapplying lipstick. Somewhere, Olivia was probably pacing a bridal suite, surrounded by hand-picked friends and relatives she trusted to tell her she was glowing. The ceremony was scheduled for 11 in the morning Eastern Time. That meant they were roughly 3 hours ahead of me. By the time my omelet arrived, they were likely ushering guests into the chapel, seating them in long rows of polished wood, cueing soft music through the speakers. I cut into my breakfast slowly, eating without hurry. Every now and then my phone buzzed, rolling slightly on the table. I did not check it. Not yet. I wanted this moment to stay untouched by whatever chaos might be unfolding. After finishing most of my meal, I finally turned the phone over. A few missed calls, a handful of texts, one voicemail notification from a number I did not recognize. I set the phone down again, letting it breathe, letting myself breathe. The ocean in front of me shimmered under the rising sun, each wave catching the light differently. I felt as though I were watching my old life from behind thick glass. I ordered another cup of coffee and leaned back in my chair. The breeze picked up slightly, bringing with it the sound of distant laughter from a group near the pool. I was still listening to their voices when my phone lit up again, this time with an incoming call from a number that looked vaguely familiar. I watched it ring, debating whether to ignore it. Something nudged at me. Curiosity, maybe. Or intuition. I answered. A woman's voice came through, quick and strained. "Hello, Maggie. This is Sandra. I am the wedding planner for your sister's ceremony. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I sat up slightly. She sounded controlled, but her breath carried a tremor. "Not a bad time," I said. "What can I help you with?" There was a pause. Then she exhaled sharply, as if bracing herself. "I was calling to ask if you had heard from Daniel. He left the venue about 30 minutes ago, and no one could reach him. We are trying to determine whether he is coming back." My stomach tightened, not with surprise, but with recognition. Certain disasters have a texture you can sense long before they arrive. "I have not heard from him," I said. "I am not in Ohio." "Yes," she replied quickly. "Your mother mentioned that. She said there were spiritual concerns. I wanted to confirm whether you might know anything that would help us locate him." I closed my eyes briefly. The phrase spiritual concerns felt almost clinical coming from a stranger. "I do not," I said softly. Another pause. "Thank you. We will continue reaching out. I just thought..." "Well, never mind." She ended the call gently. I stared at the phone for several seconds before lowering it to the table. The breeze brushed against my arms, cooling the warmth that had collected there. I sat very still, listening to the distant waves. Somewhere far away, a door had opened. Or maybe an illusion had cracked. I did not have time to consider the implications before the phone buzzed violently. A voicemail notification appeared, immediately followed by 2 more. Then a call from Mom. I let it ring. My coffee had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway, needing something to ground me. The phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. Then my dad's name flashed across the screen. I felt a flicker of something inside me. Not dread exactly, but a familiar tightening, like a reflex that had not yet learned it was no longer required. I let the call go to voicemail. More alerts. The phone vibrated constantly now, as though trying to crawl across the table toward me. I finally picked it up, holding it loosely, and opened the voicemail tab. The first message was from my dad. His voice thundered through the recording. "Michael, what did..." He walked out. "This is your fault. If you had shown up like a normal sister, none of this would have happened. I hope you are satisfied." The message cut off abruptly. I listened to the second one. Mom's voice, thin and breaking. "Maggie, please call us. Something is wrong. The pastor says there might be interference. He says someone's energy is disturbing the blessing. Your sister is beside herself. I do not know what to do. Please pick up." I closed my eyes, letting the sounds fade. The third message was from Olivia. Her voice came through jagged, as if she had been crying for hours already. "Maggie, please answer. I need you. I know things have been hard between us, but I cannot find him. No one can. They say he left in his truck. He was supposed to meet with the pastor. Please call me. I do not know what is happening. I need you." I held the phone loosely for a long time. The sky above the water had begun shifting toward a deeper blue, more intense, more reflective. I could feel the weight of the voicemail sitting in my chest, but it was not the frantic heaviness I might have felt in another life. It was something duller, older, something like resignation mixed with a thin strand of sorrow. Another alert chimed. A new message. I hesitated, then pressed play. It was the wedding planner again. Her voice was gentler now. "Michael, I wanted to update you. The ceremony has been paused indefinitely. The pastor has informed the guests. Olivia is in the back room with your parents. We are trying to keep things calm. If you receive this and have any insight that might help us reach Daniel, please contact me. I am sorry to bother you." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, letting the sun settle across my face. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, none of the vindication people imagine in moments like these. Only fatigue. Deep, bone-level fatigue that rose slowly from somewhere inside my chest. The waiter approached quietly and cleared my plate. He asked if I needed anything else. I told him no. My voice sounded even to my own ears, calm in a way that felt strange. He walked away, and I remained at the table, staring at my hands resting calmly beside the phone. More calls came, more texts. My screen filled with notifications until I stopped counting. I did not answer any of them. Eventually, I stood, walked back toward the beach, and let the sounds of conversation and laughter replace the chaos vibrating in my human pocket. I found a shaded area near the water and sat down, letting my toes sink into the cool sand. A couple walked past holding hands. A child dragged a pail through the tide pool, squealing each time a small fish darted away. Life continued, unconcerned with the implosion of a wedding happening hundreds of miles from them. Shoreline. I exhaled slowly and leaned back on my hands. I thought of Olivia in her bridal suite, pacing the floor in her gown, mascara streaking the corners of her eyes. I thought of Mom whispering prayers under her breath, asking for guidance. I thought of my dad pointing his frustration anywhere but inward. They were likely spinning themselves into circles, each of them searching for the variable that had broken the equation. And because they had been conditioned to see me as the unpredictable component, the explanation seemed obvious to them. But I knew better. Some structures collapse not because of one missing piece, but because the weight they carry was never stable to begin with. The sun shifted again, casting a thin line of shadow across my lap. My phone vibrated beside me. I watched it light up and fade, like a steady pulse. After several minutes, I picked it up, not to respond, but to acknowledge the noise. The screen was filled with missed calls, voicemails, and messages. I scrolled through them without opening them, feeling the weight of expectation in each one. Then, without ceremony, I pressed the side button and powered the phone off completely. The screen went dark. No buzzing, no interruptions. just silence. A clean, uninterrupted silence that settled into my bones with a kind of reluctant comfort. I sat there for a long time, listening to the water and the faint laughter of strangers. The world kept moving, steady and unconcerned. And for the first time that day, I let myself melt into the quiet, letting the noise of a wedding that never happened drift farther and farther away. I did not turn my phone back on until nearly midday. The sunlight had already crept across the balcony tiles, warming them to the point where I could feel the heat even through the thin soles of my sandals. I slept longer than I expected. Maybe it was the ocean air, or the silence, or the simple fact that no one could reach me while the phone lay powered off, face down, several feet away. For once, I had created a distance that could not be barged through. When the screen finally lit up again, it pulsed like a warning. Missed calls, messages, voicemails, a stacked wall of red dots. My name must have been spoken with every possible combination of anger, panic, and desperation. I let the notifications continue piling across the top of the screen, but I refused to tap any of them. One message stood apart from the emotional noise, a voicemail from a Charlotte number I did not recognize. The transcription preview caught my eye, mostly because it did not include my sister's name or any frantic punctuation. It looked calm, too calm to belong to anyone in my family. I pressed play. A steady male voice filled my ear. "Ms. Avery, this is attorney Stephen Caldwell. I am contacting you regarding a financial inquiry connected to your family. Please return the call at your earliest convenience." The words financial inquiry did not startle me. They should have. But instead, they registered as something inevitable, like a bill you knew was coming because you recognized the envelope before you even opened it. When you step out of a role you have been holding together for decades, someone eventually notices the empty space you leave behind. I called him back and moved toward the sliding doors, letting them close behind me as I stepped onto the balcony. The hum of resort life drifted up from below in soft, steady waves. Clinking dishes, faint laughter. A cart rolling across a tiled walkway, background noise belonging to people who were not in crisis. He answered on the second ring. "Thank you for returning my call, Ms. Avery. I imagine the timing is less than ideal." I pulled the balcony chair away from the railing and sat. The legs scraped lightly against the floor. "It's fine. What is this regarding?" He cleared his throat the way lawyers do when preparing to walk you through something carefully. "An audit has been triggered due to payment irregularities involving your sister's wedding. Several vendors reported inconsistent transaction sources. When those payments were reviewed, older financial activities attached to your family were automatically included in the review. Your name appears repeatedly." I watched a small bird hop along the balcony edge, pausing every few steps as if listening. "I felt a strange kinship with it," he continued. "I want to stress that this is strictly a clarification process, not an accusation. But we need to determine the intent of those past transfers and whether they constitute loans or gifts from your perspective." There it was. The question my family avoided by burying it under tradition and obligation. Loans implied accountability. Gifts implied generosity. Neither word had ever been spoken aloud. They preferred phrases like helping out or covering the difference or being there for your people. I rose from the chair and went back inside, my bare feet soundless against the cool floor. I opened my laptop on the small desk. One folder waited in the center of the desktop, labeled Family Records. I clicked it open with a calmness that surprised me. "I have documentation," I told him. "I kept records of everything." "Excellent," he said. His voice barely changed. A good lawyer never reveals surprise. He listed dates. 2013, 2016, 2019. Each year a marker, a notch in a timeline I had tried to forget. I pulled up each file as he spoke. Bank confirmations, email threads, text screenshots. A trail so long it almost felt like an archaeological dig into my own choices. He asked for descriptions of each transfer. I gave them. No dramatizing, no explanation, just the clean version of truth unwrapped from all the emotion I used to dress it in. He asked one question that made my fingers still above the keyboard. At any point during these years, did you feel obligated or pressured to provide financial assistance? My instinct was to say no. Not because it was true, but because the habit of minimizing my own experience ran deep. But I had done enough excavating in the past few days to recognize that reflex for what it was. Yes, I said. Some of it was direct. Some of it was implied. But yes, there was pressure. He paused long enough that I wondered if my honesty had altered the legal path of whatever was unfolding. When he spoke again, his tone carried a different weight. Thank you for being candid. I know this may feel personal, but from our standpoint, clarity is crucial. And this helps clarify quite a bit. I leaned back in the chair, letting my spine rest against the cushion. Somewhere down the hall, a housekeeping cart clicked gently against a doorframe, mundane sounds grounding me in a place where emotional storms could not reach. He continued guiding me through the remaining details. Each question was simple, but each answer forced me to acknowledge pieces of a story I had been telling myself in softer terms for years. When we reached the end, he took in a breath that suggested the hardest part was over. I will prepare a summary statement, he said. It will classify you as a neutral party. Once you sign, you are no longer involved. Except in the unlikely event we require additional clarification. Neutral party. The phrase landed strangely in my chest. I had never been neutral in anything involving my family. They drew lines and expected me to stand on the side that kept everything functioning. Neutral was a position I had not known existed. Before ending the call, he said one thing in a tone that felt noticeably gentler. And for what it's worth, Ms. Avery, silence does not imply wrongdoing. It simply means you no longer wish to carry responsibilities that are not yours to carry. I swallowed. My throat felt thick, as if something long lodged there had finally loosened. His words were not emotional in intent, yet they hit with a kind of unexpected mercy. After we disconnected, I sat still for a long while, staring at my hands. They were relaxed, not clenched, not fidgeting, just resting in my lap, pale against the blue cushion. The email from him arrived moments later. I opened it and downloaded the attached document. The summary was clear and concise. It listed each transaction with the kind of exactness that stripped away sentimentality. $3,000, $5,000, $4,200, all written out in full words. Seeing them that way made the amounts feel heavier, as if each syllable added weight to the truth. I read the document twice, then again, not because I doubted the accuracy, but because I wanted to witness the story of my own enabling, laid out in a format that did not allow excuses to soften it. The option to sign digitally blinked in the corner. My fingertip hovered above it for several seconds before I pressed down. A single smooth motion. A simple curve of my name, and then the formal click signaling completion. A confirmation email arrived almost immediately. Thank you, Miss Avery. Your role is now resolved. Resolved. Another word my family never used. The room felt slightly larger once the message disappeared from the screen. I stood and walked back to the balcony, needing air. The sun had shifted, brightening the water to a nearly impossible shade of turquoise. A couple walked along the shoreline, leaving slow footprints behind them. Life kept moving in every direction except the one I used to run toward. I leaned on the railing and let the heat settle into my arms. My breathing slowed. A kind of inner quiet began expanding, as if making room for something new now that the old exhaustion had been pushed aside. Eventually, I returned inside, printed a physical copy of the signed statement in the small business center near the lobby, and brought it back to my room. The paper felt heavier than expected when I set it on the desk. The ink of my signature looked steady, undeniably mine. I slid the document into my travel folder and closed it. The sound was soft, but final enough that I stood there a moment, absorbing it. Without thinking, I reached for my phone. It lay face up on the nightstand, the screen lit with fresh messages that kept appearing every few seconds. I watched them collect without opening any. Then, with a steady hand, I pressed the power button until the screen went black. Not silent. Do not disturb. Off. completely off. I set it down and walked back to the balcony with nothing in my hands. The horizon stretched wide and warm in front of me. For the first time in years, nothing tethered me to anyone else's emergency. The world could spin without me holding it together, and I could finally let the stillness inside me take up its rightful space. I sat again, the sunlight softening against my skin, and let the quiet settle in deeper. For once, the crisis unfolding elsewhere did not pull me by the throat. It could unfold without me. It already had. And I realized, with a calm that felt almost profound, that I did not need to witness the fallout to know something had shifted beyond repair. Something in the system had surfaced the moment I stepped away, something that could no longer hide behind my silence. I closed my eyes and breathed, letting that truth settle like warm sand across my shoulders. The chapter of fixing things had ended the second I chose not to answer the phone. I chose a cafe in downtown Charlotte that was always busy enough to drown out tension, but quiet enough that no one would need to raise their voice. A place with wide windows, warm lights, and steady foot traffic. Neutral ground. Somewhere no one could storm out without walking past half the neighborhood. I arrived 5 minutes early and picked a table near the window, the kind of table where you could see someone approaching long before they reached you. I set my bag on the chair beside me and ordered a small black coffee. No cream, no sugar. Bitterness felt appropriate. My dad arrived first. His silhouette filled the entrance before he did. He scanned the room like he expected an ambush rather than conversation. When his eyes landed on me, he exhaled sharply, the way someone might react to discovering an overdue bill tucked under a windshield wiper. He sat without greeting. His jacket was still half-buttoned. His voice came out low, tight. "You have done enough damage, Maggie. You need to fix this." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup without lifting it. "What exactly do you think I damaged?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table. His eyes flashed with something between anger and disbelief. The wedding, the family name, Olivia's reputation. Everything is falling apart, and you sit here drinking coffee as if none of it matters. Before I could answer, my mom hurried in. She looked smaller than the last time I saw her, almost fragile. But her expression carried that familiar mixture of worry and accusation. She took the seat next to my dad and adjusted her purse on her lap as if bracing herself for impact. She did not bother with pleasantries either. "People at church are already talking," she said. Her voice trembled not from sadness, but from embarrassment. "They want to know why the wedding stopped. Why is Olivia devastated? Why money was missing? Why were vendors calling us? Do you understand how humiliating this has been?" Took a slow breath, the kind that keeps your shoulders level, even when the air feels too heavy. Before I could speak, Olivia appeared behind my mom's chair. She dropped into the seat across from me with dramatic force, her sunglasses still on, even though the room was dim. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled them off and threw them on the table. "You ruined everything," she said. Her voice cracked like a teenager who had been denied a prom dress, not a grown woman whose wedding had evaporated. "You have always been jealous. Everyone knows it. You brought bad energy into the planning. You brought misfortune. You never wanted me to be happy." I let the words settle. They were familiar in shape, but not in volume. Childhood accusations spoken now by an adult who looked at me like I was both a problem and punishment. My dad nodded, as if she had presented factual testimony. "She is right. You cursed the whole process. Ever since the pastor mentioned that certain energies can interfere with young couples. Your behavior has been nothing but destructive. You should not have withdrawn support when we needed you most." Support, a word used so casually, as if the meaning were shared. Mom leaned closer, her voice quieter but sharper. "If you had handled things with grace, none of the vendors would have panicked. They said the money trail looked odd. They said your name was everywhere. They asked why a sister would pull back at the last second. What did you expect them to think?" I looked from one face to another. 3 versions of blame. 3 people convinced that one missing piece in their machine had caused the entire system to collapse. None willing to question why the machine needed that piece so desperately in the first place. The server passed by and set a bottle of water on the table. Not for us, but for the couple behind us. Even that small disruption allowed a breath of air to wedge between the tension. I reached into my bag and pulled out a clean manila envelope. I placed it on the table gently, deliberately. No dramatic flourish. No announcement. Just the steady act of setting truth where it could not be ignored. Inside was a stack of printed statements. Every transfer, every date, every request. Amounts written in full words. $3,000, $5,000, $4,200. Not vague suggestions, not favors, not family support. Documented transactions that had been kept quiet by consensus. Olivia frowned. What is that supposed to be? My voice came out calm, unshaken, the same tone I used at work when clarifying a complicated report. This is the record of what you call support. My dad reached for the stack first, flipping through the pages so quickly that the corner edges snapped against one another. His eyes moved across the numbers, but he did not absorb them. He made it to the end and tossed the stack back on the table as if it were a menu he disliked. These numbers do not matter, he said. Family helps family. That is the rule. You know that. Mom took the pages next and read more carefully. Her lips moved as she skimmed the lines. When she reached the breakdown of money spent for Olivia's business launch, she stopped mid-sentence. Her fingers tightened at the edge of the paper. This is exaggerated, she whispered. It is not exaggerated, I replied. Those are the exact transfers. Your bank confirmed them during the audit. Her face shifted. Not in denial, but in something less certain. A tremor of doubt. A flicker of recognition that the story might not match the facts. Olivia snatched the stack from her and stared at it, eyes darting. She pressed a hand to her forehead. This is all out of context. You agreed to help. You said you wanted to invest in my future. I did help. And I did invest. But none of that gives you the right to blame me for things I did not do. I was not responsible for your fiancé walking out of the church. I was not responsible for the vendors noticing issues. I was not responsible for the audit. She slammed the papers down so loudly that the woman at the next table looked over. Olivia leaned forward, tears forming but not falling. You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. You always wanted to show everyone how much better you are. Successful Maggie. Perfect Maggie. Untouched by real life. My dad placed his hand on the table, fingers spread wide like he was preparing to steady something unstable. You could have prevented all of this. One wire transfer. That is all it would have taken. You chose not to. You chose to let everything fall apart. Mom nodded vigorously. The pastor said your resistance and your energy could block blessings. I did not want to believe that. But look where we are. Everything went wrong when you pulled away. I felt their words like a familiar old coat being held open in front of me. Heavy, itchy, unflattering. Something I had worn so long that my shape seemed molded to it. But standing outside of it now, I could finally see how it had never fit. I lifted the coffee cup and took a small sip. Warm, bitter, solid. When I set it down, the sound was soft but final. I have not said anything about your pastor's beliefs. I have not said anything about energy. But I will say this. You blamed me when I helped. You blame me now that I stopped. The constant is not my presence or absence. The constant is your expectation. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Olivia seemed startled into silence. My dad looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. You have changed, he said quietly. His tone was almost mournful. You were never this cold. I shook my head. No, I was never this honest. His jaw tightened. He did not have a response. Mom shifted in her seat, her voice cracking. We needed you. You knew we needed you. How could you walk away like that and still call yourself part of this family? I met her eyes. The truth arrived without hesitation, because being part of this family was killing every part of me that was mine. Olivia recoiled like I had struck her. That is dramatic. No, it is measured. It is accurate. I reached into the envelope again, and pulled out one last page, a single sheet listing the total sum of all the transfers. I placed it on the table and slid it forward. This is what you called a contribution. This is what I carried alone. My dad glanced down, then away. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Olivia stared at the number written out in long, unforgiving words. $48,500. Silence thickened over the table like humidity before a storm. No one argued. No one shouted. No one offered a counter-narrative. The lack of denial was the loudest truth in the room. I let the silence stretch for several seconds before standing. I picked up my bag, slid the envelope inside, and pushed my chair in neatly. I did not make a speech. I did not ask for understanding. I did not wait for apologies that were never coming. My dad looked at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Where are you going?" I kept my voice steady. "I am leaving before any of you decide I owe you more explanations." Mom reached out as if to touch my arm, but her hand fell short. Olivia watched me with wide, furious eyes, but she said nothing. I walked toward the door. My steps felt grounded. My chest felt clear. The cafe's warm lights blurred slightly as I passed beneath them, not from tears, but from the sharp transition between what I had carried and what I had finally set down. Outside, the air was cool, crisp, and clean. Behind me, the family I had spent a lifetime trying to hold together sat in stunned stillness, surrounded by evidence they could not argue with. And for the first time in my adult life, I did not turn back to fix anything. I walked out of the cafe and into the cool Charlotte air, and for a long moment I simply stood there, letting the door close behind me. The noise of the street rose around me, cars passing, someone laughing near the corner, a dog barking at nothing in particular. All of it felt oddly distant, as if I were hearing the world from underwater. My legs carried me toward the parking lot, slow and steady, but some part of me was still sitting at that table, staring at three people who had convinced themselves for years that my existence was a resource to be mined. When I reached my car, I sat inside without turning on the engine. The quiet settled fast, thick enough that I could hear my own breathing. For the first time since childhood, there were no strings pulling at me, no expectation waiting behind the next ring of the phone, no crisis I was secretly responsible for preventing. It should have felt liberating, maybe some version of freedom. But at that moment, it felt strangely hollow. Walking away has a cost. People like to pretend it does not. They say things like, "Do what is best for you," or "You deserve peace," as if then decision arrives gift-wrapped. It does not. It arrives like a bill marked past due. By the time I got home, the first ripple had already formed. My cousin Tracy sent a message filled with spiritual warnings and implied disappointed loyalty. I skimmed the first lines, saw phrases like family unity and blessings withdrawn, then deleted the entire thing. A few hours later, my aunt wrote something similar. Her tone was softer, but the message was the same. They had heard the story, or their preferred version of it, and were aligning themselves accordingly. One by one, the messages trickled in, slowly at first, then faster. The ones that came from people I had not spoken to in months carried the most sting, mostly because they acted like experts in situations they had never bothered to ask me about. I deleted most of them unread. A strange numbness settled where hurt might have been. By the end of the week, several relatives unfriended me online. Some blocked me. One woman from our church community, someone who had never spoken more than 3 sentences to me in my life, posted a vague reminder about honoring your parents and resisting prideful behavior. It earned dozens of supportive comments. None of them mentioned me by name, but all of them were aimed in my direction. Silence, it turned out, had its own volume. The temptation to defend myself flickered in small bursts, but I let each one pass. Explaining would mean re-entering the very arena I had just left. And I was tired of arenas. Tired of battles disguised as conversations. Tired of being measured by how much pain I could absorb without complaint. Instead of fighting the noise, I turned my attention to work. My home office in my townhouse near Dilworth felt different now that I was number, longer using it as a refuge between emotional obligations. The air felt clearer. My desk looked less like a battlefield and more like a workspace again. I opened my laptop and dove into a project I had been avoiding because family. Demands kept pulling me out of focus. The shift was immediate. My mind, suddenly uninterrupted, stretched wider. Thoughts connected more easily. Ideas arrived quickly, one after another, forming a clear strategy in my head. Hours passed before I realized I had not checked my phone once. I had not thought about checking it either. 2 days later, during a virtual meeting, my team reviewed the proposal I had refined. My director studied the screen, tapped her pen 3 times on her notebook, then said, "Maggie, this is exceptional work. If leadership signs off, this could turn into something large." I felt the words hit a part of me that had not been touched in years. Recognition without strings. Appreciation without extraction. Simple acknowledgement that something I did held value on its own. Later that afternoon, I received the email confirming the new contract. A substantial one. A contract that could shift the trajectory of my work for the coming year. I read the message twice, then 3 times. The timing struck me as almost comedic. The moment I stopped carrying everyone else's responsibilities, my own life began unfolding again. Still, that evening, after dinner, I felt a tug in my chest that I could not easily name. Not sadness, not regret, something quieter. A hollow space where obligation used to live. When you spend your entire life filling gaps for other people, you learn to mistake constant motion for connection. When the motion stops, silence has a way of revealing things you were too busy to feel. I walked around my home slowly, touching the back of the sofa, the frame of a picture, the edge of the kitchen counter. Everything looked the same as it had months ago, but it felt like a new place. A place I had not known how to inhabit fully because so much of me had been directed outward. A few days later, I went to the grocery store. A simple errand, one I used to do rushed between other demands. I moved through the aisles with a calm that felt foreign. I lingered over produce. I debated which salad dressing to buy. I compared brands of granola. It was mundane and incredibly grounding. Then, as I turned the corner near the bakery, I saw an older woman from my parents' church. She looked at me the way people look at crime scenes, equal parts fascination and judgment. Her eyebrows lifted with practiced sympathy. "I heard about everything," she said. "You must be hurting too. What a terrible season for your family." Her tone suggested that the season had been caused by me, like a storm system I had intentionally released. I simply nodded. I did not explain. I did not deny. The fewer words I offered, the smaller the target became. I lifted my basket and continued walking. Her eyes followed me until I turned down the next aisle. Later that evening, after unloading groceries, I received an email from my director. The signed contract had been finalized. My involvement would begin immediately. The project was high impact, high visibility, with financial implications that could strengthen my team's standing. I reread the line twice. High impact, high visibility. For the first time in many years, my work life was not competing with a domestic crisis. And yet, as the night settled, the emptiness returned. Grief, but not grief. Loss, but not regret. A space inside me that felt tender, the way skin feels after a bandage is removed and the air hits a wound that had been tightly covered for too long. Walking away had a cost, a real one. I had lost the illusion of belonging. I had lost the role I had been assigned since childhood. Fixer, provider, interpreter of emotional storms. I had stepped out of an identity that, while harmful, had been familiar. And there is always a price for stepping out of something familiar. But the more I sat with that feeling, the clearer it became. The cost was lighter than the weight I had carried for years. Yes, there was a loss, but there was also space, breathing room, a quiet that allowed me to hear my own thoughts without filtering them through someone else's needs. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not out of anxiety, but out of rest. Real rest. I made coffee and sat near the window, watching the sunrise brush pale orange across the sky. Charlotte mornings have a particular stillness before traffic begins, and that stillness matched something inside me. I thought of my dad's face at the cafe, a mixture of anger and confusion. I thought of my mom's trembling voice, trying to reconcile embarrassment with denial. I thought of Olivia's tears, sharp and theatrical, unable to see anything outside her own reflection. For years, I had treated their reactions as responsibilities, something I was required to manage. Now they were simply images. not instructions. By midday, another message arrived from a relative trying to guilt me back into the fold. I deleted it without reading past the first line. Then I opened my work calendar, mapped out new project timelines, and felt the day take shape around something sturdier than old obligations. Freedom had a price, but carrying myself was infinitely lighter than carrying everyone else. Later that evening, as I stood at my kitchen counter chopping vegetables for dinner, I realized something almost startling in its simplicity. I missed the idea of a family. Not the one I had, not the roles I was assigned, but the idea of feeling known without being used. Accepting that loss did not break me. It clarified me, and that, more than anything, was worth the cost. I finished chopping the vegetables, turned on the stove, and let the pan heat slowly. The quiet of my home settled around me, warm and steady. For the first time, the emptiness did not feel like something was missing. It felt like a room, a beginning, not an ending. And I let it stay. The first sign that things were shifting came from an unexpected direction. I was at my desk on a quiet Thursday morning, reviewing a contract clause for the new project, when a notification popped up from a name I had not seen in years. Melissa, an old neighbor from my parents' street. She never reached out unless something had gone sideways in her own life, so I almost ignored it. But the preview line caught my eye. I heard about Olivia. I'm sorry. I opened the message. The apology was vague, the way people speak when they are not sure what information the other person already knows. She wrote that several companies in Ohio had withdrawn partnerships with Olivia after the wedding disaster. Influencer work depended heavily on image, and apparently the image of a bride abandoned at the altar can attract sympathy, but it does not build brand confidence. One sponsor had cited instability, another asked to review her financial reliability. A third simply stopped replying. I sat back in my chair, not surprised, not pleased, just absorbing. Karma rarely arrives with thunder. More often it shows up quietly, folding itself into the natural order of things. No spectacle, no audience. Just cause and effect finally finding alignment. A few days later, I heard from a coworker whose cousin attended my parents' church. According to her, the community was divided. Some people pitied Olivia, calling her a victim of circumstances. Others questioned how a family so involved in the church could have allowed such financial confusion. There were whispers about mismanagement, about spiritual warnings ignored, about money that seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish into wedding vendors' accounts. For years, my parents had been admired for their reliability. They were the couple that showed up early to volunteer, the family that hosted holiday meals for those without local relatives. They cultivated that image carefully. Now cracks showed, and people noticed. Slowly, quietly, but noticeably. I moved through my days without reacting. The story belonged to them now. I had stepped aside. I was no longer the buffer that caught the fallout before it reached them. Then, during a grocery run, my phone buzzed with a message from my Aunt Ruth. She was my mom's youngest sister, the only person in the family who ever showed me consistent gentleness. She asked if I had time for coffee. I hesitated, then agreed. Meeting her did not feel dangerous. It felt overdue. We sat at a small cafe with wooden chairs and soft lighting, a place far quieter than the crowded spot where I had faced my parents. Aunt Ruth arrived wearing a cardigan that looked hand-knit and glasses that she kept pushing up her nose. She hugged me longer than necessary, then sat with a sigh that carried years of unsaid things. I heard the others met with you, she said quietly. They did. Her gaze dropped to her hands folded on the table. I am not here to defend them. I only want to understand how you are doing. The question almost startled me. It had been asked so rarely in my life that it felt foreign. I am steady, I said, tired but steady. She nodded. Word travels, even when people pretend they are keeping secrets. I know more than they think I do. I did not ask what she meant. She continued. They spoke poorly of you at first. A few said you caused the wedding to fall apart. Some repeated that nonsense about energy and misfortune. But then the audit came out, and people began asking questions your parents could not answer. She paused to let that settle. I listened, not defensive, not absorbing blame, just listening the way I always wished someone would listen to me. She exhaled slowly. I should have spoken up years ago. When your mom and dad kept asking you for money, I knew it was getting out of hand. I knew they relied on you too heavily. But every time I tried to bring it up, your mom shut me down. She said it was private, that you were happy to help, that you were doing well, so why not share what you had? I felt a slight tightening in my chest, not from hurt, but from recognition. That story had been repeated so often in my family that it became an unofficial creed. Maggie does well, so Maggie helps. Maggie understands. Maggie is strong. Magic can handle it. Aunt Ruth looked up, eyes soft and full of apology. I am sorry. I saw the pattern forming, and I stayed quiet. That was wrong. Her voice cracked on the last word. She reached for her cup, but her hand trembled too much to lift it. I folded my hands together on the table, mirroring her posture. I did not offer comfort. I did not tell her she was not at fault. I did not absolve her. I just sat with the truth. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. My tone was steady, not cold, not warm, just honest. It means something. She nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. They relied on you because you made it easy, and they never questioned whether you had someone to rely on. A small silence settled between us, the kind that does not hurt, but simply lives in the space two people share when truth is allowed to stand on its own. After a moment, she added, I do not think your parents understand what they lost. Not yet, but they will. I did not respond. I did not need to. Later, after we hugged goodbye, she held my arm for a moment and said the sentence that stayed with me long after we parted. I should have spoken sooner. Her voice cracked, and she let go. In the following weeks, more pieces of the fallout reached me through sideways channels. A college friend who still lived in Ohio mentioned seeing Olivia at a local event, visibly upset, trying to maintain composure while answering awkward questions about her fiancé. Another acquaintance sent a screenshot of a news article, not about my family, but about Daniel. The investigation into his business dealings had expanded. Several investors had filed complaints. His past, which had been polished in the wedding narrative, was beginning to unravel under scrutiny. The article mentioned fraud allegations, possible misappropriation of funds, and an inquiry into false financial statements he had used to secure partnerships. None of it had anything to do with me. None of it surprised me either. Karma did not require my participation. It never had. I thought of Olivia, of the way she blamed everything wrong in her life on someone else's shadow. She had placed her hopes in a man who built his reputation on borrowed shine. She had defended him without question. Now she faced the humiliation of discovering that the pedestal she climbed had no one foundation. I did not feel satisfied. Not joy, not triumph. Just a quiet sense of inevitability. Life has a way of revealing the truth, even when everyone involved works hard to hide it. One afternoon, as I walked to my car with a bag of groceries, I received a brief message from Aunt Ruth. No explanation, no build-up. They are struggling. Just thought you should know. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The words did not warm me. They did not wound me. They simply existed, carrying neither guilt nor vindication. Later that evening, I sat on my couch with a blanket over my legs and replayed the conversation with her. The way her voice softened when she spoke of regret. The way she admitted her silence. The way she acknowledged a truth that had been dismissed for so long. She had not asked for forgiveness. She had not tried to rewrite history. She had merely told the truth, plainly and without self-protection. And I had met her honesty with quiet acceptance. No blame, no comfort, just a nod. A nod that meant I heard her. A nod that meant the cycle ended with me. A nod that meant I finally understood that not every part of the past needed revisiting. Some things only needed to be witnessed. And that, I realized as I turned off the lamp and let the room dim around me, was enough. I spent the next few days moving through my house in a way that felt new, as if every room had shifted half an inch while I was not looking. Nothing had changed physically. The same furniture, the same pictures, the same stack of books on the nightstand that I kept promising myself I would read, but something inside me had rearranged itself. I moved with more intention. I breathed without bracing. When I cooked dinner, the kitchen felt quiet rather than lonely. When I lay in bed, The silence felt like a blanket instead of a void. The aftermath of walking away had settled, but not in the dramatic way people expect. No sudden revelation, no triumphant music. Just space. A kind of mental unclenching that took place quietly, the way dawn appears before you realize the darkness has lifted. Work became the first place I noticed the shift. My calendar was still full, my responsibilities the same, but I felt present in a way I had forgotten was possible. I was no longer splitting myself into two people. The one who performed well, professionally, and the one who constantly checked her phone under the table, waiting to absorb the next emergency. During a project review meeting one Monday morning, I caught myself listening without the usual layer of background noise in my mind. No replayed arguments, no anxious predictions. Just the information in front of me. When my director asked what direction I thought we should take, my answer came easily, without hesitation or the quiet fear of disappointing someone. After the meeting, she stopped me in the hallway. "Michael," she said, "you are different these days. In a good way. More grounded. More sure." I smiled because she was right, and because the acknowledgement felt like stepping into sunlight after years in the shade. In the following weeks, I accepted more invitations than I normally would. A coworker's birthday dinner. A casual Saturday farmer's market with a neighbor. Even a small outdoor concert in Romer-Bearden Park. I went without feeling the need to check in with anyone. No one expected me to report home. No one waited for my involvement. That simple freedom, one I had never fully recognized as missing, began to stitch me back together. Still, even in the steadiness, grief lingered quietly. Losing a family, even a dysfunctional one, leaves space behind. Not all losses feel like relief, and not all relief comes without its own ache. Some evenings I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching headlights glide past. I would remember moments from childhood, times when things felt whole, years before money and superstition and roles became shackles. Those memories were not painful. They were soft, almost faded, but they reminded me that even difficult people are not purely villains. They are simply people who never learned how to love without condition. Life moved on, though. It always does. 3 weeks after my conversation with Aunt Ruth, my mom called. Her name lit up the screen slowly, as if the phone knew I would hesitate. I thought about letting it ring, but something inside me loosened. I answered and stepped onto my back porch. Her voice cracked in the first few seconds. "Maggie, things have been hard here. Your dad is not himself. Olivia barely leaves the house. The community keeps asking questions. The embarrassment continues." She took a breath, thin and shaky. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" The question floated in the air between us, gentle but loaded. The porch boards under my feet were cool. A soft breeze brushed my hair. It felt symbolic in a way I tried not to overthink. "No," I said. Not unkindly, not coldly. Just calmly. "I do not regret choosing myself. I regret how long it took me to realize that choice was even allowed." My mom's breath caught. For a moment, she did not speak. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I see." There were 1,000 other things she could have said. Denials, justifications, blame. She reached for none of them. The silence that followed was fragile, but it was the first honest quiet we had shared in years. "Take care of yourself," she said finally. "You too." She hung up before either of us could add anything that might ruin the delicate truce forming between us. The call did not repair anything. It did not reopen doors. But it closed something cleanly. A chapter, I suppose. Not with a slam, but with a soft click. A week later, I booked a second trip to the Bahamas. Not out of escape this time, out of intention. The resort had become a place where something in me had shifted, and I wanted to see it again through new eyes. No crisis waiting in voicemail, no family unraveling in the background. Just me stepping towards something rather than running away. When I arrived, the air wrapped around me with warm familiarity. The lobby smelled like citrus and salt. The staff greeted me the way people greet returning guests, with quiet welcome rather than surprise. I checked into a suite similar to the one I had stayed in months earlier, but the way I walked through it was different. I no longer carried the weight of responsibility in my shoulders. I was not holding space for anyone else. I was inhabiting my own life, On my second morning, I woke before sunrise and walked to the beach barefoot. The sand was cool and slightly damp, holding the imprints of earlier footsteps already softened by the tide. I stood at the water's edge and watched as the horizon shifted from deep blue to pale gold. The waves moved with a steady rhythm, calm and unhurried. I matched my breathing to it without meaning to. Something inside me felt aligned in a way it never had before. I thought of the first time I stood on this shore, months earlier. Exhausted and unraveling. I had arrived carrying the weight of my entire family in my chest. Now, standing in the same place, I felt tall, grounded. My life no longer orbiting around people who mistook my silence for agreement and my giving for obligation. This time, I was not here to recover. I was here to choose. Choose peace. Choose space. Choose a life where my worth was not measured in financial contributions or emotional labor. Choose boundaries that did not bend the moment someone raised their voice or invoked the word family. The sun climbed slowly, painting the water in streaks of orange and silver. I walked a little farther until the waves brushed higher against my legs. The ocean always tells the truth. It takes and returns. It pulls and releases. It destroys and restores. And it does all of it without apology. I let the water reach my knees, then stepped back onto the sand. A small breeze moved through the palm trees behind me. I felt entirely present, every sense connected. For the first time in my adult life, I was not waiting for someone else's approval. Not holding myself small so others could feel large. Not bending under the weight of inherited roles. I was simply myself. Whole, intact, enough. As the morning brightened, I stood there a little longer, letting the quiet settle into the deepest parts of me. Eventually, I turned toward the resort, walking slowly, letting the sun warm my shoulders. The path ahead felt open, wide enough for grief and hope, loss and possibility, all at once. Before I end this story, let me leave you with this. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you're listening from. I took one last look at the horizon before heading inside, carrying with me only what I chose to keep.